Hello, friends, and welcome to the Campfire Conversations podcast, brought to you by your vertical church community. Here, we will take a deeper look into the Word of God and house discussions to help you know God deeply and follow God fully as a disciple of Jesus Christ. We aspire to provide content and resources to further your walk with Christ and those around you. Make sure to check out the Campfire Conversations podcast portal on the hub page at verticalnc.org to stay informed about new episodes and also to share with your family and friends. As always, our desire is to see people believe in Jesus Christ, belong to his beautiful multi-ethnic, multi-generational church, and become disciple-making disciples.
Thank you for joining us for our very first Campfire Conversations podcast. This is amazing. I am Ryan Brooks. I get to serve as lead pastor here at Vertical Church, and I am joined by the very lovely, very special Miss Yana, Jenay Connor, our discipleship director. Say hello, Yana.
Hey, man, that was so invigorating.
Was it?
Way to start. Good job.
Try my best. Try my best.
And so, like you said, this is our first podcast episode.
Woo.
We also started a blog about a month ago. And so new things are happening all over Vertical Church. Can you share a little bit with the people why we've added a blog and why we are starting a podcast?
Absolutely. You know, we had a lot of people ask me over the years. We're year 10 of our church, and people have asked all the time, hey, when are we going to do a blog? We're going to get a podcast. I want more stuff. And really just haven't had the capacity to do that. But one of the things that has kind of really inspired this podcast, the blog, is to help people engage with God's word and his mission, specifically aside from Sunday morning. So we want to, what Brady Shearer says, seize the other 167 hours in the week. How do we help people in our church believe, belong, and become? That's not just Sunday morning. We definitely love to have people worship with us on Sunday morning, but we believe that it's not just what you attend on Sunday morning. We believe fellowship and discipleship is every single day. So we want to create content to help our church engage in their walk with Christ in the other 167 hours of the week. I remember I was asked once, what's the future of the church? And I truly wholeheartedly believe this, that it's about not about destination, but about intersection. How do we help people not make church a place that they go, but it's an integration and intersection of every area of their life? And so prayerfully, with the podcast, with the blog, we'll be able to create content to help the people that are connected to Vertical Church pursue that intersection and integration in every area of their life. And it's not just on Sunday morning. Now, let me just be clear here. Your pastor loves to preach.
Oh, he does.
I love Sunday morning, but my job is to shepherd and equip the church, not just preach the church. And so I believe this is another platform to help us see people believe, belong, and become.
Yeah. And I know that we have been talking about this since maybe like my first few days.
Absolutely.
At Vertical Church.
Yeah.
And I've been here about 3 years now. And so this is a significant milestone for us. And so over the course of really the last month, we have been engaged in a one-story Bible reading plan.
Yes.
Where we are reading through all of the Bible. And so this is really exciting. It's exciting times at Vertical Church. And it's just created, once again, that intersection where we can have conversations with each other around the Bible. And that's kind of what we want to do here on Campfire Conversations. It's like we want to have conversations around the Word of God. And so this past week, we have finished like Exodus, right?
Yeah.
And we are moving over into Leviticus. And so I just want to hear from you, because, you know, I don't know about you, but I've started a Bible reading plan quite a few times. And I always get through Genesis and Exodus.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's about when, I get to Leviticus. But just as you read through Genesis and Exodus this year, like what were some things that stood out to you? What were your big takeaways?
I would say my biggest takeaway is just seeing God's intentional work to pursue relationship with us. Like he just over and over through Genesis, through Exodus, you see God is way more interested in a relationship with us than we are with him.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, man, he's going above and beyond to figure out, like, I made this creation and I desperately want relationship, and I want them to have a relationship with me. And so I think sometimes, especially when we look at the Old Testament, sometimes people just kind of see God as this distant, angry figure. But when I've read through Genesis and Exodus, especially reading it with my family over the last few weeks, I just see God just constantly pursuing relationship with his creation. He deeply desires that relationship. And that was very, very encouraging because, man, they were jacked up. Genesis and Exodus was wild. Like they were, woo-wee. And he still is like, I still want you.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beautiful when I look at Genesis and Exodus.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely walk away from those stories being like, yo, the grace and mercy of God
right.
is real.
Yeah,
you know, like every time I read Jacob's story in particular, he's such a problematic character, but I'm just like, man, he really lets me know like that God's mercy and grace is real because he gets to be a part of what God is doing. And even like God wrestles with him and it's an interesting text.
Yeah.
Like he seems to be only concerned about himself, but God endures. I think also for me, one thing that stood out to me this time was how many times God restates his promises to his people.
Yeah.
Like he gives a promise to Adam and Eve, and then he gives a promise to Noah, and then he gives a promise to Abraham. And throughout Abraham's story, like God recommunicates his promise multiple times. And it's in moments where Abraham is questioning God or in moments where he has doubt. And he does the same with Jacob. He does the same with Joseph. And then even with the children of Israel, like he continuously restates his promise. And it was almost as if God wanted to reassure them that, hey, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
You know, and just seeing that God cares about sort of our emotional well-being and how he seeks to comfort us in our moments of fear and doubt, to bring us the peace that we need, but also to help us to take the next step. And I just thought, man, this is really kind of God. Like he could have just said, I said it once, you know, let's keep moving.
Yeah.
But he graciously restates his promise to his people.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, and even when I think about that a little bit more, it's just like it creates confidence, but also clarity.
Yeah.
Like when you read Genesis and Exodus, like God is very specific. He's very detailed.
Yeah.
There's no ambiguity. There's no like, what did he mean by this? Like he's very specific and clear. And one of the things he is specific and clear about is his promise that he made to mankind and creation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are starting Leviticus.
Woo! Leviticus.
This week. And so, hey, if you're unfamiliar with us, Vertical Church, we have a one-story Bible reading plan. You can find it on our website, verticalnc.org/hub. And so this week, we're going to be starting in Leviticus. Now, Leviticus gets a bad rap, you know, because it's filled with laws and it's filled with a lot of things that we don't really understand. And I'm going to be honest with you, as I was reading, coming to the end of Exodus, I was started asking myself the question, like, what is God doing? Because he makes this promise that he's going to bring them into this land of milk and honey, but they don't immediately go there. And I just noticed, like, I just was like, let me just look this up on Google. When do we get to that part?
Yeah.
And we don't get to it until Numbers 12. So all of like the back half of Exodus, all of Leviticus, and then a little bit of Numbers, like we're kind of in this transition period. And I'm just asking the question, like, why hasn't Israel already arrived to the promised land? And I just want to hear from you, like, why do you think we're in this holding pattern here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to remember is that there is a relationship between God and his creation, specifically the children of Israel. And their responsibility is to reflect the nature of God, reflect the character. He has given them an assignment, a kingdom to be priests in the earth to help all creation to know who God is. And there are some things that have to happen in them before they can possess the land. So a lot of times we see that, or we think that this idea of this promised land is strictly for the benefit of the children of Israel. So I grew up in a church and we always preaching about the promised land and God's going to do this for us and Goshen and all these wonderful things. And it's like, no. This is a place where we are called to be in relationship with God. So remember, we left Exodus and God has delivered the children of Israel out of bondage. He's delivered them out of the oppression of the Egyptians, but also out from under the leadership and lordship of the Egyptians. And now he says, I've freed you from that. Now I got to show you how to live with me. And so some of the things that we see that happens in the latter part of Exodus and Leviticus is God saying, this is what it looks like for you to be with me. And when I think about it, honestly, Yana, if he had taken them to the promised land too soon, they would have bypassed that experience of like, this is what it means to be with God, right? It's kind of like kids, at least with my kids. I can't talk about nobody else's kids on this podcast, but I'll talk about my children, right? Man, sometimes they can be so caught up with the gift that they forget about the giver.
Yeah.
And so can you imagine just being in bondage for 400 years, completely oppressed? We talked about this in our last sermon, how they were broken spirited and then automatically taken into a land flowing in milk and honey. They wouldn't know what to do. And so I think some of the things that we're seeing in the text or in the narrative, which is why I think we often get through Genesis and Exodus and we struggle with Leviticus, it's like, okay, that's a narrative. Now we're getting into what does it mean to be together? What does it look like for us to be a kingdom of priests, right? What does it look like for us to actually be in this beautiful relationship with God? And there are some things that absolutely have to change in the people, I believe, before they can truly embrace possessing this promised land that's promised to them.
Yeah. I want to get back to what you said about how they are to be a kingdom of priests. But before we go there, I want to like really zone in on what you just talked about how God wants to be with his people and how he's establishing this newfound relationship, because they did come out of bondage where they were in Egypt worshiping other gods, right? And so in the last sermon that you preached on the Exodus, you talked about how like they don't know who Yahweh is.
Right.
You know, they don't know who this God is. And so God is revealing his power, revealing his nature to them. And so they're kind of like in the early stages of like dating, you know, like where it's kind of awkward and we're trying to figure out like, what do you like? You know, you don't like Mexican food. Okay, cool. You know, like,
it's wild to say, but okay.
It is wild to say because guacamole is amazing. And so you're just trying to figure some things out. And I think as I was reading through Exodus this time, what stood out to me was in Exodus 25:8, where God says to Moses, hey, let the people make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their presence, that I might dwell in their midst. And it just is so beautiful because it communicates that we have a God who just wants to be with his people, right? And that's what he had with Adam and Eve in the garden, right? And so now he's trying to restore that. And in reading that verse, amongst all the other details that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, it made me think about how God wasn't dwelling in their midst, right? He was in a cloud, you know, he was in a pillar of fire by night. So he's not with them. And then it also made me think about Exodus 20:18-19, where it says that, you know, God tells Moses to get all the people together to consecrate themselves and to come in to the mountain. And they are terrified. They are absolutely terrified, so much so that they're like, hey, Moses, hey, you speak to us. You speak, like, we don't need to talk to God.
That's too much.
You speak to us. And you see sort of this condensation of God to be with Israel in this very intentional way where they don't have to have this kind of fear. And so he's like, hey, let's set this tabernacle up. Let's set up this sacrificial system so that we can dwell and be with each other. And I think it also just communicates like we are sinful.
Yeah.
We are sinful and God is holy and he can't just come to us. And so when the people say like, Moses, you speak to us and we're going to listen to you, but don't let God speak to us lest we die. You know, they have this awareness that they are different from God, that God is holy and they are not. And so God is like, hey, let me create a tabernacle. Let me create a system so that I can dwell with my people. And it's just beautiful because we know where the narrative is going, right? Yeah. Where Jesus comes in John 1, it says he tabernacles, right? Among us so that we can be in his presence.
That dwelling is not for his benefit, it's for ours.
Yeah.
Right? So God is not like, I need to experience y'all.
Yeah.
He's saying y'all need to experience.
Absolutely.
Because that was the design in the garden, was there was this witness that Adam and Eve experienced with God that was lost and broken by sin. And God is like you said, I want to be with you. I want you to experience relationally with me. And this is where we get this whole idea of like creating this portable garden, this sanctuary. I remember growing up hearing that the first sanctuary was in the garden. Like that was the first sanctuary. And there'll be another sanctuary in heaven. There's another garden we're going to get to. That's later on in the reading plan. But but there is this witness that God is pursuing for us. And when we see this tabernacle, we see this effort constantly of God saying, what do I need to do to help make sure we can be together?
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get back to the kingdom priest thing, because I love to hear you talk about this. So can you share a little bit more?
Yeah. So God makes a covenant with Abraham. He is sparsed out from after the Tower of Babel, and he's pretty much assigned this responsibility to build this kingdom of priests, which would be the children of Israel. And this idea is that there would be a specific group of people that would be set aside, not to be set over, but set aside for the responsibility of showing all of creation, all of mankind, all of humanity, who God is, and being that on behalf of them. And so this idea was that these particular priests were consecrated as mediators. That's essentially what a priest is. A priest is a mediator. And this is another just clear demonstration of God's desire to be with the people. Yeah. So we hear that Jesus Christ is our mediator. Like this started in the Old Testament here. Like there was somebody there to make this relationship work.
Yeah.
So we needed a mediator. Jesus ends up becoming the perfect mediator. But man, if you understand mediation,
I do actually.
Mediation. So think about this. When we talk about mediation, we're talking about most times two individuals that are not on the same page, and you need somebody to be in the middle to make that connection. I feel like preaching now. I feel it. I feel it in my soul. But there were mediators, and this kingdom of mediators, which is what the children of Israel are called to be, and what will be birthed out of the children of Israel, which is what we see with Jesus, are those that would stand in the gap between us and God. So like you just said, it points to the picture of humanity being sinful, God being holy, and there needed to be something and someone to stand in the gap. Yeah. And so the priests, they were the children of Israel, they served as the mediators, and the great mediator that we would all experience would end up being Jesus Christ that we see in the New Testament. And so I think it's important when you're looking at Leviticus, coming out of Exodus, and you're seeing all of this reading about who the priests are and what they do and how they're supposed to be dressed and how they're supposed to be set apart. Like, understand, like, this is for the sake of the relationship between the people and God. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we can read these texts and be like, is all of this really necessary?
Right.
And but I think when we're asking that question, it's because we don't understand how holy God is and how sinful we are.
Yeah.
Like, we don't understand that gap. And so we're coming to the end of our time, but I just wanted to lean into this thought because I know that Leviticus can be tough.
Yeah.
Right. And you can just kind of feel like you're going through the motions and you're not really getting anything out of it.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to share with our friends who are listening what I've heard Jen Wilkins say before. It's actually in the introduction of her Hebrews Bible study.
Come on.
But she talks about how sometimes when we open our Bible, we need to come not necessarily looking for a word or, something that makes us go, or that gives us like sort of our next steps for the day. But sometimes we're just reading for comprehension.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just need to read in order to understand the story, right? Because we talk about this is one story, one comprehensive story about God.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we come to texts like Leviticus, we can still ask the question, like, what does this reveal to us about God? What does this reveal to us about humanity? And as we sort of make the daily deposits of understanding what's happening in the story, then maybe later we'll find the treasure. Because I think Leviticus is going to pop for all of us
Yeah.
when we get to Jesus.
Yeah.
It's going to make a lot more sense when we get to Hebrews.
Right.
And so right now we're just sort of building a foundation. And so if you're listening, watching, and you're struggling through Leviticus, and let me tell you, it's not going to be the only time you're struggling because we got numbers coming up. And I don't know about you, Pastor Ryan, but for me, it's always like First and Second Chronicles. I'll be like, well,
how do we get to the Gospels?
Along? Can we get to the resurrection? But if that's you, I just want you to know, like in those moments, like lean into just reading for comprehension. Like, what do you see? What is standing out to you? What is this story telling you about God? And what is it telling you about humanity?
Yeah, I would also say just thinking like sometimes you're just putting pieces to the puzzle. Like it's not the whole picture. And so I know for me, sometimes I'm like, man, I want special revelation. I want this big aha moment. And it's like, no, sometimes I'm trying to put the story together. And I think one of the things, we talked about this in staff meeting the other day when we were talking about the Bible reading plan, just the idea that some of this stuff is to help you appreciate Jesus Christ. Some of it I'm reading just to be like, you know what? There was definitely a need for a priest. And man, I'm so glad Jesus was the high priest. And so like some of it, when we're reading it, we can't get lost in it. We can't, get overwhelmed by it. I know when we were reading the narrative about the tabernacle and the tent, and I'm reading that with my children, and they're like, man, this is 3-4 chapters. And it's just like, man, we had, different skins dyed and scarlet and linens and different posts. And they're like, did kids go into this? I was like, no, the kids didn't go in. And so I took a moment. I got a YouTube video, and I was like, let's see if I can show it to you, because I feel like if I showed them the picture of it, and they still were like, this seems like a lot. I was like, it was a lot, and let's thank God we don't have to build that anymore. And Wesley was like, so we could just go to our church. I was like, yeah, we could just go to our church. She thought that we would have to build this tabernacle. I said, no, that's the beauty of the gospel, that Jesus Christ came and now that doesn't have to be done anymore. We get to have access to God through Jesus Christ by faith. And so sometimes when we're reading the Old Testament, especially these early books, we're getting context. And there's not always this special revelation, but like you said, we're putting the pieces together. We got to stay the course, remain faithful to it. It has a purpose.
Yeah, it does.
It has a purpose. Don't be afraid of Leviticus.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of Leviticus. You can handle it.
You can handle it.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, friends, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope that you will join us next time.